So guys, to wrap it up the videos for today, I really wanted to do a video showing to you a little bit of how notching works, and to be honest, how radars work a little bit. This video won't be too long because honestly I'm really tired. I just woke up from actually watching the Japanese Grand Prix and it was at 2 a.m. over here. I went sleep at 4 a.m. so I'm really tired, but I really needed to do a video about this. I saw some people talking about it in some discords, right? So I really decided to make a little bit of a quick video talking about what notching actually, how notching actually works for a detection, and also basically how you can have this in mind when you are trying to detect a target and fire a radar missile at a target, and why is the missile missing the target? Why is my radar not detecting that specific target? Well, let's take a look. Okay, so here we go. We have a graph that I did here that I just realized has a little mistake over here, but it doesn't matter. Here we have the target relative speed graph basically. So relative to you trying to detect the target, this would be the speed that a target is. What you have to understand, guys, is that depending on the speed of the target relative to you, it would mean that you can or not detect it. Why is that? Well, pulse Doppler radars, okay? Not only that, but this is one of the reasons why sometimes when a target flies perpendicular to you or in a 90-degree sideways kind of flying angle, you will not be able to detect it with a pulse Doppler radar. So how does that actually work in the game? Well, this is basically the graph of that working, okay? So basically what you have to have a detection here is to have the target in between these brackets over here, these ones, so between 60 meters per second, for example, this is just an example in speed, depends on the radar and stuff, to 2,500 meters per second in speed. So if it is in this range over here, it's getting closer to you, so it has a positive speed and it's getting closer to you. If it has this speed between these two, this is like 2,500 meters per second, it's really fast. It's like 7,000 kilometers per hour, something like that. So it's really fast. You will be able to detect the target. So normally you can see from a very slow movement of the aircraft up to a very high movement, you have a very broad band of speed or of width of speed over here that you can detect the target. So if the target is moving towards you, for example, at a Mach 1, 330 meters per second, for example, you will be able to detect because it is in this range. The same goes if it is going away from you. So if it has a negative speed, so if it's actually escaping your own speed, it's actually increasing the range. It will actually, if it is inside this bracket for this particular radar that I'm using as an example over here, if it is between minus 2,500 meters per second and minus 60 meters per second, it will be able to be detected. So this would be what a normal pulse Doppler radar would look like. It has to be higher than 60 meters per second, slower than 2,500, or minus, it has to be lower than 60 meters per second, or with a maximum of a lower speed of 2,500 meters per second. So if it is in these two brackets, this one and this one, it will actually detect the target, okay? But what happens, first of all, here and here? These are the physical limits of the radar to be detecting a target over here. So here, if it flies above these speeds, it will not be able to detect the target, okay? No aircraft in the world flies at 7,000 kilometers per hour, so you don't need to, worry about that. And normally, you won't be able to even have a trouble detecting missiles right now with the changes in radars that they did, just because of that. Because even missiles, they can I don't think they go up to 7,000 kilometers per hour. I think the max is like 5,000 with the R27, I think. I have to check. But even then, it needs to be in a very high altitude in a very specific situation. So you can basically forget. It's kind of infinite over here because these speeds are so high that it's really impossible to get away from it in the detection range, okay? Normally with this mode of radar, normal pulse Dopplers and stuff like that, okay? And what happens in between here? So this is basically where the pulse Doppler filtering is happening, okay? And because of how pulse Doppler works and everything, I'm not gonna get too much into it. It means that in between here, the radar is kinda ignoring everything here because it's too close to a standing still position, and then quote unquote it thinks that it's standing still. It's not really like that, but it's a very narrow simplification of how in real life it works, okay? In the game, basically the filtering method will means that if the target is at above 60 meters per second and below 60 meters per second, very close to zero over here, the radar will not be able to detect it. Of course, again, this depends on the radar. The more modern radars, these numbers will be lower, so 30 meters per second, for example, and it would mean that the radar can actually have a very narrow speed width over here that it cannot detect anything, okay? At the same time, when do you see this type of thing? When is an aircraft flying this slow? Well, normally they never fly this slow, right? But when you fly perpendicular, your relative speed to somebody detecting you will be relatively close to 0 meters per second, or in between these two gaps over here. So it means that the radar will not be able to detect you. So if it's outside these gaps, and if it's inside here, the radar will not be able to detect you. That's why notching works. That's why you turning 90 degrees to the side and then, you know, turning downwards or upwards or whatever you want to do, but basically doing this will make you pretty much invisible to a pulse Doppler radar if you do it correctly, and depending on the sensitivity and the modernity, how modern the radar that is trying to detect you is. Of course, when a missile is coming, this will work as well, but of course with its own speeds and everything, and of course the relative speed of the missile is completely different, but it will be there as well. That's why notching works against missiles sometimes as well. But Gaijin added something with the INS that it turns itself off, the seeker, when it loses the target. So it has ways of dealing with this with INS, but you will not be able to detect the target, but sometimes you will get the kill, even if the missile is not really seeing the target too much or detecting here and there, but it's not really sure where it is. It will use the INS to try to get to the target anyway, even if it doesn't see, even if it is in this gap, right? Of course, deploying chaff when you are in this gap will make the most, you know, sense, and it will be where the chaff really works, okay? Something like this can be happening as well with the high PIF modes, for example. That's why sometimes when somebody is flying away from you, you cannot detect them too much. So a high PIF mode will have a very high pulse repetition frequency. So it will repeat the pulse of the frequency that it's actually doing with radiation to be able to increase the range and be able to detect targets that are, you know, even in a further distance that you ever could with a normal pulse Doppler mode, medium PRF, that was what we saw before, right? But that creates some troubles. One of them is a limited lower speed over here, and even sometimes a larger gap over here. Some radars will have a larger gap than the 60 meters per second here. Just because of that, you will increase the range of the radar, so you will be able to get 40-50 kilometers more of range. But this, if the target remotely flies close to the 0 meters per second, it will already lose the lock or lose the detection, and if it's trying to fly away from you, you will have a much higher limit negatively here, so that you can detect, right? So the target, if it flies above 410 meters per second, for example, the radar will not detect it, meaning I mean, this is Mach 1 point something, right? So it's really, really slow. So if the target flies above that, flying away from you, the hyper-AF mode will just not be able to detect the target, okay? So this is how it kind of works. And of course, deploying chaff over here as well helps a lot against hyper-AF as well, okay? And basically this is it. I don't want to be too long over here. I already am too long. Hopefully it was clear enough. Just remember, this is how it works. So that's why the radar cannot see anything when you are notching it, when you are flying perpendicularly to the target's radar. That's why he doesn't detect you, okay? Again, it's just because it is filtering out whatever thing is here, because it will think, it's not really thinking anything because it's a radar, but you know what I mean? It thinks that it is standing still. So it basically, it's kind of like that. It just ignores everything that it's in this speed range because it is made to be able to be looking down where the ground will be at these relative speeds, 0 meters per second, right? So of course it's standing still. So you kind of get the point, okay? Hopefully you enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye guys, see ya.